its ongoing business. It is a fairly full agenda. I just remind everyone, obviously we welcome a lot of people, some people from across the province who are tying in through our technology option, which the board had approved a number of times ago, that we go live while we're conducting our business section of our discussions and deliberations. So welcome to the people that are across the province that are taking the time to listen to some of the decisions that are made by the English School District. I'd encourage our trustees, when they do actually have commentary or want to participate sort of on an auditory level in the meeting, to make sure we run the microphones as smoothly as possible so we don't make the experience for the at-home watchers a little bit more challenging. All right. So first order of business is to ask for a motion to adopt the agenda as presented. Moved by John, seconded by Tom. All in favor? Those against? Motion carries. Thank you for that. So the next order of business is the consideration of minutes, and it's our board meeting of January 26, 2019. Are there any errors or omissions? Just for normally what happens, obviously, with these things, they're posted online, so everyone has an opportunity to review them prior to the meeting, and we go through. So if there's no errors or omissions, can I entertain a motion to accept the minutes as presented? Moved by Eric, seconded by Lester. All in favor? Those against? Motion carries. Moving from the minutes to business arising, our first piece 4.1 under business, or our only piece under business arising, is the consideration, decision, and recommendation on the mobile grade configuration. And I'm going to turn the floor over to to Ed and get him to go through the process before we finalize our decision.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to move quickly through a presentation that outlines some background information on the mobile school system, some information on some of the community feedback that we received through the public consultation process. The work that staff undertook on your behalf came as a result of a board motion on April 14th of last year. That motion was to begin a review of the mobile central school system, in particular looking at whether or not the option existed to move the grade 5s from St. Bernard's Elementary to Mobile Central High. This slide indicates to you the catchment zones for Mobile Central High and St. Bernard's Elementary. Some of the considerations that were used as we worked our way through this process. Grade 6s currently housed at St. Bernard's Elementary until September 2019 due to the construction at Mobile Central High. Rooms have been repurposed to function as classrooms and student service spaces. Library space at St. Bernard's Elementary has been subdivided as a classroom. There are washroom space challenges, and there are no flex spaces for emerging needs. Some other considerations. Currently, St. Bernard's Elementary has 17 classrooms, 14 regular classrooms, and 3 modulars. As a K-5, the current room requirement is 16. Enrollment is projected to increase to a high of 384 in 2028, and the maximum room requirement of 17 will be needed in 2025 to 2028. And there is overall site and building congestion. Some of the impacts with the grade 6s at Mobile Central High. The library space at St. Bernard's will be reinstated to its original purpose. Less students at St. Bernard's will mean less demand for existing bathroom facilities. And also, there is a standing capital request for washroom expansion at St. Bernard's Elementary. And students will occupy 14 of the 17 available classroom spaces at the school for 2019-2020. And another consideration for you is that current projections still reflect continued growth in the area. Consideration must be given to the total available classroom space at that school. This slide indicates the projections and the room requirements at St. Bernard's Elementary as a K-5, highlighted by the need for 17 rooms in 2025. As a K-4, the maximum number of rooms needed at St. Bernard's Elementary will be 15, and that doesn't occur until 2028. Some considerations at Mobile Central High include the school currently has 14 classrooms, of which 11 are regular classrooms, including a music room, an art room, and a science lab. The school is also using partially scheduled spaces in the cafeteria. The school is currently receiving a 9-classroom extension, and that is sufficient to accommodate grade 6s as well as freeing up specialty areas. And there is additional space at Mobile Central High to accommodate the grade 5s. The enrollment at Mobile is projected to increase to 397 in 2028, with a maximum room requirement of 16 in 2027. Room requirements are calculated as 1 classroom per 30 students. And of course, based on a previous decision of the board, the grade 6s will move to the school in September of 2019. The projections at Mobile Central High as a 6-12 indicate a maximum room requirement of 16 in 2027. As a 5-12, the maximum number of rooms required is 18 in 2027. As indicated previously, the district engaged in a public consultation through the use of thought exchange. In that exchange, there were 181 participants, 379 thoughts shared by the school communities, and almost 14,000 individual ratings of those thoughts. Some of the questions that were asked in the exchange: to what school does your family most associate? 74% of the respondents were from St. Bernard's Elementary. 6% of the respondents were from Mobile Central High. 15% of the respondents indicated that they had students in both schools, and 5% indicated that they had no students in either school. Question number 2, do you believe that the grade 5 students should be moved from St. Bernard's Elementary to Mobile Central High? 20% of the respondents said yes, 62% of the respondents said no, and 18% said, I do not know. The next question that was asked was, what term best describes your role in this exchange? 91% of the respondents were parents. 1 student responded, 3% indicated that they were another family member, for example, a grandparent, aunt, or uncle. 5% of the respondents were staff members, and 1% was a school community member. In this particular slide, we've indicated a number of the top thoughts from the St. Bernard's Elementary school community. I'll just wait a second and give you an opportunity to read down through some of those. These will be the top thoughts for those parents at St. Bernard's Elementary that thought that the students should not move and therefore voted no. This will be the top thoughts for St. Bernard's Elementary parents who voted yes. And finally, for your consideration, some of the pros and cons associated with moving the grade 5s to Mobile Central High. The pros would be moving students into a newer building. It provides St. Bernard's Elementary with more room, space within the current building itself, and it reduces the pressure on the washroom facilities at St. Bernard's Elementary. And the one con against moving the grade 5s would be that there's limited community support for the move. Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ed, for the brief. These processes are always tough, and we get to a point at the end of a consultation process that includes interaction with the communities as a whole. It includes a number of study sessions that the Board of Trustees go through so that they become very familiar with the circumstances in a particular area prior to this, and now we're getting to the culmination of that particular piece where we have to make a decision, because that's unfortunately or fortunately the job that we have to do. So it's the past practice and continued practice that we'll turn over to the Vice Chair to present the motion for consideration that has been recommended.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be moving the following motion. Whereas the Newfoundland and Labrador English School District is committed to providing the best possible educational program for students, and whereas a reorganization of schooling in the Mobile Central High School system in Zone 14 is required to achieve that objective, therefore it be it resolved that St. Bernard's Elementary be reconfigured from a kindergarten to grade 5 school to a kindergarten to grade 4 school, and that grade 5 be assigned to Mobile Central High School effective September 2019, and that the grade 5 students move to Mobile Central High in 2019. Be it further resolved that Mobile Central High be reconfigured from a grade 6 to 12 school to a grade 5 to 12 school effective September 2019. Mr. Chairman, I so move, begging a seconder for the motion.
Thank you, Wayne, for moving the motion. Seconded by Trustee Gill. Okay, discussion around the table. Trustee Aspel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As trustee for the zone, I would like to say that this has not been an easy decision. There have been a lot of factors that I have weighed, and my vote today will be based on the fact that I believe that moving the grade 5s provides the best educational opportunity possible for children in that system.
Thank you, Trustee Aspel. Any further commentary associated with this particular decision? Hearing none, we will call the vote. All in favor of the motion as presented? Those against? Motion carries. Thank you. So that concludes our business arising component of our piece. Now we're going to move to the director's report, and we've changed the order a little bit in this because it's such a significant piece of our meeting that we want to make sure that we get the latest and greatest. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, Mr. Chair. Director's report. So always good to remind ourselves of our values, and first and foremost, of course, students first. A while ago we presented, and we've began this school year with this focus on where we wanted to be as an organization. Literacy skills, in other words, students learning at grade level, and particularly grade 3 at grade 3 is a major focus. Numeracy skills as well, and those have been greatly assisted by the Education Action Plan, which saw the introduction of reading specialists into our program this year, as well as 5 program specialists in the area of literacy and 5 for mathematics. Wanted to move to a strengths-based integrated service delivery model, learning opportunities from multiple platforms, enhanced professional learning, and moreover, governing all of this would be enhancing learning opportunities by engaging learners. One of our major focuses has been engagement of students. So emanating from our discussion with my director's principal advisory group, focusing on student engagement, looking at ways to do that, we settled on one particular author, Dr. Fullen, who has quite a bit to say regarding deep learning. And we define deep learning as focusing on these 6 global competencies: critical thinking, character, citizenship, collaboration, communication, and creativity. And at the core of deep learning, the center of this particular model, if we are focusing on changing our pedagogical practices, forming new partnerships, taking the learning environments outside of the classroom, experiential learning, and leveraging what we know works in the digital environment. And ultimately, what we want for our classrooms are students asking the questions valued above the answers, varied models for learning, explicit connections to real-world application, collaborative environments, and assessment of learning that is embedded, transparent, and authentic. And we've made great strides this year with that, and I would like to compliment all of our program staff, in particular our frontline staff in schools, our teachers, and the principals that guide them. I'm going to choose a couple of examples to illustrate where we are with deep learning. One school is Amos Comenius Memorial School in Hopedale. And recently, they have been awarded the Ken Spencer Award for Innovation in K-12 Programming, offered for the National EdCan Network, formerly the Canadian Education Association. And this project involved essentially taking the community of Hopedale and the people of Hopedale and turning it into an online virtual environment created by students. And it's an excellent example of deep learning in action. This is a screenshot, and if I could ask Cheryl to play the audio of the teacher involved.
We were first approached last year by members of the school board, and they asked us, are you interested in trying virtual reality in the classroom? And first thing I said, can I check with students first, see if they're comfortable with it? And sure enough, after checking with students, they were all for it, and it launched from there.
So one particular point I'd like to point out in that audio, when contacted by the school board, the first thing he did was consult these students. So this is some of the product. Now, it's hard to do justice to it here in a two-dimensional environment, but in 3D, you can walk around the community of Hopedale using Google Expedition. And this is something that the students themselves created. And some other examples from that site. And again, if we can listen to Curtis Oliver, and these are his points on what he thinks students acquire with respect to deep learning.
We're learning about deforestation, the impacts of deforestation. We can go right to a tropical rainforest and be in the scene of a clear-cut area and look at where the trees have been cut down and look at the equipment that's used to harvest it, and then we get to see pictures of climate change around the world, and the students are able to learn how climate change works and how it impacts communities in the north. You can learn about any topic, whether it's biology. You can do a virtual reality tour of the respiratory system or even the digestive system. Students in primary and elementary can learn about the life cycle of different types of animals like butterflies and frogs. They can explore space. You can go underwater in the Bahamas. There's even a virtual reality tour of Torngat Mountains National Park in Labrador. And of course, there's one of Hopedale, which my students and I created last year.
You can hear the pride in Curtis's voice, proud of his students. And this is Curtis in his classroom. He also brings these talents to the primary elementary part of the school.
Well, the students are very engaged, very excited. They feel part of the learning process. They take ownership of it. they're asking for more opportunities. For example, if we go a few classes without a virtual reality tour, several of the students are asking, how come we never had a tour lately? When is the next one? Even if we have the door open and there's a student walking down the hallway to the bathroom, they'll peep their head in
And we won't finish that thought. Now, it's not just simply, a fancy viewmaster. This is something where the teacher controls what the student is seeing and where they're going to an extent that sets it up with learning objectives. But they've also expanded this into creating traditional works. And this is what the students have to say. They're absolutely enthusiastic about it. And I'll let this linger for a little bit for you to read it. I will say that there are students who may have struggled with engagement and attendance in the past, who are now, we're told by their parents directly, are excited to be in school and want to go each and every day. So this is the award ceremony. We were joined by a gentleman from the EdCan network to present this plaque and, of course, the $1,000 that went along with it. We're very proud of Curtis.
Well, first of all, I'd like to give thanks to the students. Without the students, this would not have been possible. Also to the staff and administration at Amos Comenius Memorial School, members of the community, because it's a team effort and everyone is very supportive, everyone works together, and this award belongs to everyone, because without everyone's participation, it would definitely not have been possible. And I'm looking forward to hanging up the plaque right in the main foyer of the school.
Okay, so again, think back on that slide. He changed his pedagogical practice. He leveraged digital using the Google device. Took the learning environment outside of the classroom into the community with the elders in the environment. And great learning partnerships here with the Nunavut government, who contributed funding, of course, the school district. And this is, again, exactly what we're speaking of when we speak of deep learning. Another example is a little bit different, because there's professional learning involved here for our teachers. And there's a ocean learning partnership through Coastal Explorers Field School. And we've had a number of teachers. We also had the partners so it's Parks Canada, it's Department of Fisheries and Oceans, but also Memorial. We also did a lot of work with, in this one here, included St. Anne's School in Conn River, as well as the Sheshatshiu Innu School in Sheshatshiu. And we're going to play this one video that'll give you a sense of the day.
I'm a resource management officer. I work with Janet in Terra Nova National Park for Parks Canada. My job is I coordinate our ecological monitoring program in Terra Nova, so I'm really happy to be involved here and look forward to it.
Hi, I'm Shona Sutton, science teacher for 20 years in Holy Cross in Eastport.
We want to, I guess, build your confidence and give you that experience so you feel confident enough to take your students outside to a coastline environment so they can engage in some shore-based science learning.
They can tell me if that's good or bad reading. So the hint here is that if it's good for sea life, it's falling in the red part of the thing there. So it's kind of fun at Worsley Park because we have the opening of the river, the mouth of the river. Some groups are going to be sampling water that is actually quite fresh, versus groups that are farther down the beach and they're going to have salt water. So then we can talk a little bit about that. We can talk about brackish environments and different species, and we've got eels in our river because eels can live in different types of environments. So that's kind of a neat little piece that we can add when you're at Worsley Park or another place where you've got a discharge.
Vegetation in your quadrant. Did we just do that?
Yeah, we just did that.
Identify the different types.
So we got kelp,
vegetation. You see, so we have kelp.
Yeah, I usually get because we're not getting super complicated here in identifying things. I usually get them to tell me what color it is because that's usually an important part, and maybe what shape it is.
Okay.
Just kind of things that you would use if you were going to ID it. If you were going to use a dichotomous key, what are the kind of a basic thing?
I've hired high school students. I've mainly hire undergrads and then graduate students. So I'm mentoring all the time and take them up through. But if they don't learn science and they don't want to learn science, that's not good for me. So I really need your help.
Sir, I work with Janet.
Can you kill that? Okay, so again, a different example, but this is a professional learning opportunity here where they'll take that back, those teachers will take that back and do that real life experiential science in their communities, along their own coasts, in their own communities. So you see, again, shifting pedagogical practice, you're leveraging the digital. We've got multiple partners involved here, and we're leveraging the arrangement. So a couple of other examples just this week. CBC article today, did Beaconsfield and boat building. NTV did a Maker Faire thing the other night. And of course, we come back to the example as well, a CBC article on Amos Comenius in the media today. So we're really having effect. We're driving this home, this deep learning, real-world experiential learning, and we're very pleased where we go. We really believe that by focusing on this, we're going to increase skill level and competencies for our students. More students will be completing high school, and there will be higher levels of achievement as a result. The research shows if you engage in this type of activity, that's where you arrive at the end. So where do we go from here? Just to let you know what the district is doing from a holistic perspective, and I think I'll advance here. The implications for instructional leadership are huge, and we know that principals, we talk to them on a regular basis, that they have a lot of regulated, legislated, management, administrative tasks to perform. We know that the school community environment challenges them with myriad demands. So we're very cognizant of that. Looking around for a way to look at a district approach to what schools are doing in deep learning and what's happening in families and schools, we're focused on yet another product from the Fulham team, which is coherence. And coherence, it does start with, it reframes the role of the principal as the instructional leader. Prior to this, we thought best way for a principal is to be out in the corridor, in the classrooms, guiding the teacher, assessing the teacher, cajoling the teacher, assisting the teacher, but there's really not enough hours in the week to micromanage teachers. So the new focus is really as the principal, as a lead learner, as somebody who's modeling alongside those teachers, who's helping shape the culture of teachers being continuous learners and maximizing that impact on learning. We're cognizant of overloading the schools with the next new thing. None of these deep learning or the coherence model are necessarily new initiatives. They're just a way of thinking. Fullen also talks about the right drivers and the wrong drivers in education. So instead of focusing on high-stakes testing accountability measures, it's really about building the capacity of our teachers in our schools. Instead of focusing on individual teachers and leadership quality of individual principals, really it's about building collaborative teams. Instead of just acquiring technology, the more Chromebooks you have or the more iPads you have in the school does not necessarily indicate a measure of success. It's really about changing the pedagogy, as we've seen in a couple of examples here. And instead of a bunch of fragmented strategies that we're trying all over the place, we really build a systemness in here. We focus on a few things that we want to accomplish as a district together, and we work towards those ends. One thing that Fullen is good at, and I won't mine right into the detail here, are models. And one piece here, you see in the corner, the whole deepening learning piece, but it's also about focusing that direction, creating that collaborative culture, and getting accountability. Now, he says, in the previous slide, we talked about how accountability can be a wrong driver. We recognize that there are always going to be external accountability measures. Where we want to land on is that internal accountability, where a teacher or a principal or a director of school or the director is focused on their own internal accountability, about doing the right thing for the system, putting students first, and really championing learning. And I'll close off with this. Pleased to report that Dr. Fullen is coming to be with us in August. He's going to spend 2 days with us as a coach around the coherence model. And this is where we hope to then frame a district effort around what schools are doing in relation to deep learning. Subject to your questions, that's the director's report.
Thank you, Tony. It's obvious that things are changing and shifting, and it's always good to get the latest and best, because sometimes you don't even take your own mind as a trustee to what's really going on in the classroom in some of the various places. And what's pretty neat for me in this is historically some of the innovation mostly took place in the largely populated areas, and because of the nature of the new world and the net, some of this creativity is happening in all the places now, which is a significant shift from before. Any questions for Tony? Scott, Trustee Burden.
I think that this hands-on deep learning stuff is absolutely fascinating, and it would vary, I guess. I don't know, Tony, how far you see this coming into the education system, and how much playing around with curriculums we're willing to make to incorporate this into regular curriculums. Because in some parts of this province, some of the stuff that you do in these classrooms could be economic generators. I'm looking at people making snowshoes. In my hometown, my father-in-law makes them, and he can't keep them on hand because people buy them and they go out in outdoor activity and stuff like that. The boat building is fascinating, and in rural parts of the province, it would be a good. I'd have loved when I was in high school for somebody to come in and take a classroom and spend the winter making a cod trap. Because if we're trying to support these industries through our educational institutions, we're going to have to put some of that stuff into curriculums too.
And I thank you for that, Trustee Burden. One of the things that we're finding as well is that the conversation we're having with teachers is the curriculum is the curriculum, but you can achieve the curriculum or demonstrate that students have acquired what the learning outcomes by doing these things. And they don't have to do it again through conventional testing. That's the key, and that message is really becoming embedded in our schools, and we're seeing more and more of this, and it is of great value. And I take your point about the economic linkages that are possible, because we do want to leverage partnerships that are out there in the communities. That's right. There are many ways to demonstrate that you've learned an outcome.
I'm being disciplined as I go forward because I'm not pressing the mic button, and I do notice that some of the other trustees aren't as well on each one. So I do encourage it, because it's easy to forget while we're in the room and getting excited about what's being presented, that we forget that there's other people that are tuning in from across the province. Thank you, Tony, for that. Our next item on our agenda deals with our committee reports, and our first committee report is from our executive committee. And I'm going to turn the floor over to the Vice Chair, who's going to...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be tabling the Executive Committee report from April the 5th, which is in your kits. The report contains one motion that we are bringing to the board, following which we will entertain any questions on the minutes before adopting them. The motion, and I will read the motion as first and then explain the background to it, that the board approve the recommendation by the Executive Committee that the Board of Trustees of the Newfoundland Labrador English School District govern themselves by at least the rules outlined in this motion until it develops and approves its own policy to manage trustee political activity. If I can have a seconder to that motion, I'll then address the motion itself.
Moved by Wayne, seconded by John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your kit, there is a list of concerns concerning political activity by trustees. I'll briefly highlight these. I won't read them at you. And then I will invite any input from people who are responsible for formulating this. That if you're seeking a nomination, that you advise the chair and temporarily take leave. That post-nomination or election, that you leave the seat on the board and permanently resign if you've been elected. And you are not, if you were to be one of these people who are seeking office, cannot use confidential board information, board premises, or any political activities deemed inappropriate by the chair and the deputy minister. So with that, I would invite discussion on the motion and maybe from the CEO or the chair as to how we got there.
Okay, so I can open the floor from discussion. Basically, I'll open the floor for discussion, but in piece is within the transition of the boards as we came down into one board from the previous 5 or 4. We didn't have any clear policy on governance associated to political participation, and it puts individual trustees and it puts the board in a difficult spot because it puts us in conflict when you're dealing with it. This is not about a party. This is about multi-party participation. So in the reality check that we're facing now, the schools are open. It's very likely we're going into a political cycle with an election coming up, and we wanted to make sure that we had documentation on the books that gave clear guidance of what would be expected. And the only way to do that in our current environment is to bring this to the floor for the trustees around the table to have their input on the policy that is required. Is there anything further from you, from our CEO?
No, just simply to say this is really just about avoiding the conflict of interest aspects of our policies and our governance.
Okay, thank you. Is there any discussion around the table? Trustee Aspel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I understand the purpose of the policy and certainly would like to see our policy committee come up with something more permanent. I do question why the nomination, if a trustee is seeking a nomination, that it would be included, because that's a very short process, 7 days from the nomination close to the vote. So, I would like to make the suggestion that candidate or trustees who offer themselves for nomination be excluded from this piece. But if you are successful in winning the nomination, then of course you would step back from the board.
Okay. There was debate about that and discussion about it at the table, and it was more about the fact that and again, it's for discussion for the table. It was more about the fact that once you're into the political realm, it's hard to extrapolate or extinguish yourself from it. And even in a nomination process, it can be perceived that, or the perception of conflict can be there with your competitor and becomes a focal point of the place. And that discussion was had, but it's certainly a discussion from around. Any commentary from the table itself? Trustee Whittle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got some grave concerns about this. First of all, it's the first time really that I've had a chance to discuss it, because it came out of the executive without any real consultation with the rest of us. It's always something that bothers me. As a trustee, I'm an elected public official. I'm not an employee. I'm not in the executive. I'm not a staffer. So I don't understand how the policies of the provincial government for its staffers, for its its employees applies to me. Secondly, I really have issues with the 4th clause. I can almost swallow the first 3, but the 4th one, deemed inappropriate by the chair or deputy minister. Now, with all due respect to the chair and to the executive and to the deputy minister, I really don't think that I'm going to leave something that open that someone can make a decision about my activities just because they feel like doing it. I don't know if we can't prescribe this a little bit better and tease it out a bit, but I think, I don't think anybody would really accept the fact that two people are going to decide, that's inappropriate. If nobody can tell me at this table what's inappropriate and what's not inappropriate, then I shouldn't be bound by it. And we have very clear conflict of interest rules that we all follow. We declare our conflicts of interest around here, and that's already done. So if I'd like to know what an inappropriate activity is it inappropriate for me to campaign if I want to campaign with my friend who happens to be a Liberal, a Tory, or a New Democrat? Is it inappropriate for me to make donations to political parties? What is inappropriate? Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Whittle. I think the clause that you raised has been discussed around the table, and actually it was kept in because some of the executive component were saying it's better to have that discussion around the bigger table and make the peace. I think this comes from a place where we didn't have any policy in place, and as a trustee, you've sat in rooms where there's closed and confidential information that is shared with trustees that puts you in a different place when you're out and you're entertaining political activities and those kinds of things. So this is really a twofold, and this was the intent. It's not it's not to go out. Other organizations do the similar piece, but it's really to protect us as a board, that we don't get necessarily pulled into political activity that we don't necessarily want, and it's also to protect, the intent is to help trustees know where the lines are associated with political activity. It's not suggesting you're working for the government, but what I'm going to do is we're going to give the discussion a chance to go around the table and then come back to you if that's okay. Any further? I know Jennifer's on deck. We're going to go to Keith, and we'll go after that. Keith? Sorry, Trustee Cullinan.
Just the concerns that I have, obviously, it's been brought to the board's attention that I sought for nomination as well for the PC party in Mount Sion, and I wasn't successful. And I can understand, I don't agree with, but I can understand and respect someone or some party, some people thinking that there is a perceived conflict of interest. I don't get it. I really don't. If I hear Trustee Whittle as Peter calling in open line, as a Liberal, I'm going to listen to Peter as a person more than a trustee, and his role at the table is different than what his role is when he calls in supporting or helping out another person run in as an elected official. That's his choice, what he does outside of the table, in my opinion. I do have a huge problem with having literature in place to remove a trustee who's seeking nomination. We all bring a lot to the table. I think that it would be pathetic to think that someone should step away just because they're throwing their hat into the ring. Let's see what happens first. There's not going to be, in a matter of 7 days, there's not going to be, this person is not going to put themselves into a situation where they're going to be compromised, in my opinion. I mean, we can all do that now. If I pick up the phone and as a trustee call open line or get an interview by CBC, I can compromise my situation. So I don't think that it's fair. I think that what Trustee Aspel brings to the table, and I'm just using her as an example right now because she has put her name in for seeking a nomination. I think what she, or any of us for that matter, bring to the table for the sake of a 7-day period, I really don't see anything there that's a conflict, and I think that, to be blunt, it can be perceived as the board wanting to oust someone very quickly because they're going after something in a quote-unquote political sense. So no, I don't agree with that at all. I think that it's too overextended these quote-unquote rules that the executive are trying to put in place until the policy committee kicks in. That's Chair Ryan's job to get something. I don't know, were you consulted with this at all? I don't understand that. So why is the executive formulating something when the policy chair and or committee weren't even consulted? It's unbelievable. It escapes me.
Thank you, Trustee Culleton. We'll move to Wayne, and then we're going to go to Eric.
Trustee Culleton's point is well taken. We are scrambling. We don't have a policy because of the amalgamation of boards. An election is imminent, and it is important that not the executive, but the board give itself guidelines to govern. Simply put, if in fact this board, not the executive, but the board decides that asking people to take leave for nominations is inappropriate, a motion to amend by deletion is completely in order, and the board will decide. And the same for Trustee Whittle's concern there. This is not to impose anything onto you, but to give you a framework within which to operate. And when we finish this today, we will have at least a temporary policy, and I'm sure Kevin's committee will do a lot better job than what we're doing here now.
Yeah, I just want to agree totally with what Keith has said, and he made many of the points that I was going to make. No way should we suspend a trustee who's just seeking nomination for a Liberal or PC or NDP party. Under no circumstances. If they win a nomination, then I can see them stepping back and see if they win the election or not. And then if they lose the election, then they can come back as a trustee. But for just during this very brief nomination process, I think it's ridiculous to try to oust somebody for that particular reason.
Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The piece of this that really upsets me is the last item on the agenda. As Trustee Whittle said earlier, he could swallow the first three, but the last one didn't make sense. And if you look at what was written in the first three, why would you need the fourth one? If someone has stepped back or later on has stepped away from the board altogether because they won the election, why would you need the fourth one? Isn't that over and above? So I would move, begging a seconder, that we amend that motion to delete that particular article.
Okay, we have a seconder for that friendly amendment. All in favor of, discussion, I'm sorry about that. Discussion on the amendment. Jennifer.
I'm not speaking specifically to the amendment, but I had asked to speak earlier. So, you know, I understand that there's a concern that if you're an elected official, a candidate for a party, that you can't remain impartial and things like that. But what I would say to you is that we are already elected officials. And the second part that I would say to you is that we have all signed a code of ethics, and we are also aware of our own communication protocols. And so I feel as though what is being put forward today undermines us as trustees and our ability to follow through on the code of ethics and our own communication protocols.
Thank you, Trustee Aspel. We're going to go to John, then we're going to go to Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like I said, the executive had gone through a bunch of different options, and I agree with Trustee Ryan that we had gone back and forth on the last part of that, and along with the Trustee Whittle regarding participating in political activities with that inappropriate by the chair deemed and the minister. So we had no problems by taking that out, but we had discussed it to bring to the table, like you said, and I wholeheartedly support that second motion to take that out and keep the rest of it in. And it's like I said, this is new to us. We only put a policy in place because we didn't have one, and this is something we can go back to Trustee Ryan's committee later on to amend if we have to.
Thank you, Trustee Smith. We're going to go to Trustee Kendall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too would disagree with the statement that trustees participating in other political activities are deemed inappropriate by the Chair and or Deputy Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development. First of all, I totally disagree with the Chair making those decisions. And my question would be, is the Deputy Minister of Education aware of this statement?
He's probably not aware of the specific statement that it relates to us. This is boilerplate type of language that's used right across, and it's a legal term that's used, or they were using and recommending, not because of me being chair or because of somebody else being chair. It was just in the case that things that had not been contemplated under the guidelines, that this would provide not just, it wouldn't have to go through the chair, it could be the deputy minister has issues, obviously, with activity and can make the decision. But this is not, I think it's fair, reflective of the committee, that this is why this is doing this the way it was presented, is so this dialogue could take place and that we could have interim understanding for political activity that gets us to a place when we have a full policy thrashed out over time. We're going to go to Trustee Gill, and then I hope I haven't missed anything because we're running around the table. We're going to go back to Trustee Whittle, but we'll go to Trustee Gill first.
I think any amendment that we make should strike the nomination part of it. I think it should only apply to candidates once they've won the nomination. And I also think that we should strike the third bullet that we've been discussing. Thanks.
Okay, so we have to deal with the nomination that's already there. The nomination that's already there. The amendment that is already there, and we deal with that. If then there's a second amendment that someone wants to move and duly endorse, then we'll go through that process as well. That's fine if you prefer to do it that way. We can withdraw your, or it's half dozen of one, half dozen of the other, because we're all in open forum and everyone knows what's going on.
So if Kevin withdraws his amendment to strike the third bullet, and then a new amendment comes to the table to strike the third bullet and strike the nomination piece.
Is it? Can I defer to guidance?
The more appropriate procedure would be to deal with the motion to amend rather than either withdraw that, because it has been seconded now by Trustee Whittle. I think that could be problematic. So I think the motion to amend that is on the table should be voted on first. If there's a further motion to amend, then that can be debated and voted.
Thank you for that, Ian. Are there any more? Is there any more discussion specific to the first amended motion? Trustee Whittle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to speak to the amended motion. I hear lots of opinions here. I think they're good opinions. I spent most of this week examining education acts across Canada, and then I started examining board policies across Canada, particularly Ontario and Alberta, and there are different approaches to this. I just want to state that bad policy is no substitute for no policy. We have to be realistic about that. And if this was spelled out a little bit clearer and I knew what it was about, I'd be okay. My fear is, and I think we'll vote on this in a second, my fear is that suddenly involvement with political campaigns will be an issue. It seems like this was written to deal with the issue of candidates, trustees that want to be candidates. But there is the thin edge of the wedge here that, if I were to put on my Facebook page, Mr. Crosby's a fantastic guy, vote for him, is that self-interest on my part? And one thing that I have seen from jurisprudence, particularly with Supreme Court of Canada, when it comes to the dismissal of trustees and issues with trustees, if it could be demonstrated that, you have a self-interest of some sort and you're putting that ahead of your responsibility to be a governor on the board, then you have indeed violated the spirit of the board in your participations. So, it's just a matter of spelling it out for me in a way that I can accept it. I just don't like doing policy in a vacuum. I understand why we're doing it, but I'd encourage everybody to accept this motion, and then we can discuss and entertain any further ones. Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion on the First Amendment? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion? Those against? Motion carries. Do I have any further? Okay, Trustee Gill.
I would like to move a second amendment, which would be to strike the reference to people running for nomination and have the motion solely focused on candidates.
Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Trustee Ryan. Discussion.
I'm opposed to this amendment. I certainly respect the individuals who are entertaining getting into the political system. It is a partisan system, and you cannot serve two masters. Let's not kid ourselves about that. You are either a trustee or a political candidate. You can't be both. And I think the message you would be sending to the public by not stepping aside, at least for the time that you're engaged in a partisan process, is very important to our reputation in society. If it was a nonpartisan process we were running for, it'd be fine. It is a partisan process. We will be associated with the partisan process, and that could impact our relations with government. Just say, I seek a Liberal nomination or an NDP nomination or that silly Alliance nomination, and we're tired with that. I'm tired with the decision I made. Now, I'm not saying you can't come back and do things like you always did, but there's always that perception. And I think it's very clear you can't serve two masters at the same time, and you should have to step aside temporarily during any process you're engaged with if you're vying to be a candidate of a political party. That's partisan politics, folks. It's not running for the school board. It's the real world. It's the big leagues. And we can't afford to look like we're biased. I really don't believe we should be. So I would say really consider how you're going to vote on this one and how the public will see us if we do not look at stepping down. Municipal councillors do it too. It's just something to look at. It's just an accountability issue.
I don't, thank you, Trustee Whittle. We're going to go to John, but just for clarification, I don't think it's a stepping down issue. It's just stepping back during the process of when you're entertained. That's the only thing at the table, because we're not in a place yet to have a full-grown policy. But I'll turn the table to Trustee Smith.
No, I agree with Trustee Will. This is a situation of optics in a lot of different ways, and I wish every trustee the best if they do want to run for office, but unfortunately I feel it's best to step back. It's not step out. It's step back until you find out what happens in your position. So I would have to go against the Second Amendment.
Any further discussion around the table regarding speaking to the Second Amendment? Hearing none, those in favor of the amendment, raise hands. So I'm going to do a count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in support of the amendment. Those against the Second Amendment? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Therefore, a motion to amend Second Amendment does not pass. Now we have to go to the initial motion with the amendment of taking that second piece out. Any further discussion? Trustee Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really uncomfortable. I at the executive committee meeting, and the records show that I was in favor of bringing this to the full board. But I believe we've had more questions than answers in the last 10 or 15 minutes, and that makes me uncomfortable. And I think that we use the term political activity too broadly, and it lacks a lot of definition. I believe a lot of the questions that Peter asked need to be answered before we can move on. There's a difference in being a candidate, and there's a difference in being somebody who's a political worker. But how does that and I think that was Peter's question. How do we differentiate, and how do we make the policy reflect it? Because political activity is a very broad term, has very little definition in terms of what I think we're looking for.
Okay. Any further commentary? Trustee Aspel.
So my comment would be in response to Peter's. When you say, you know, even if you're a nominee, then it's partisan and obviously you're affiliated with a party. I don't necessarily disagree with that because you offer yourself up as a nominee for a particular party. That being said, I wonder how that would differ because at this point you wouldn't be the candidate. You're just expressing interest in being the candidate. And that could be for a variety of reasons why you support a particular party. How would that differ from you referencing what you talked about earlier, going around and campaigning with a Liberal candidate?
Mr. Chair, I'm a little confused. I thought we already dealt with that issue, and I don't know why you want me to answer the question? I have a freedom of association. I have a freedom of mobility. The charter rights kick in. I'm not a candidate. I'm doing something in my own time if I wish to do it. You or anyone else, or myself included, if I sought a nomination, I have stepped up to the next level. I am showing that I want to be a candidate and running for public office and using the office of a trustee as a stepping stone. It's not an issue for me. You do whatever you want to do, fill your boots, but don't tell me that it's not proper to step aside. And that's the vote we're talking about. I mean, I don't know why we're talking about it again.
All right, so we have had the vote on the Second Amendment and it was rejected. Okay, so now it's specifically on what the motion read in the first way with that amendment that takes out the piece about the Deputy Minister and the Chair having a secondary role in this. Any further discussion about the original motion with the amendment? Hearing none? What? Okay, we're going to go back to the...
The motion is that the board approve the recommendation by the Executive Committee that the Board of Trustees of the district govern themselves by at least the rules outlined in this motion until it develops and approves its own policy to manage trustee political activity with the codicil that the third bullet has been struck by amendment to delete.
Okay. Therefore, is this a discussion on the motion or is this back to the second?
Well, I need clarity on what we're saying. I don't understand what we're saying here.
Okay, the only thing that's been extracted from the original motion in the dialogue is bullet number 3. So which is bullet number 3, Trustee Lee? So Trustee Lee.
No, what you have on the floor is a once amended motion. The amendment is by deletion to delete the last bullet. Well, you can read it yourself. That's fine.
Yeah. So it's the bullet that associates the chair and the Deputy Minister having further. Okay.
So is that what we're voting on? So then maybe I'm not as dumb as I look, or I think I am, because I don't understand. I have a question, and I want political activity defined. So next week, Christopher Mitchmore comes up to St. Leonard Cricket, and we go to Lansing Meadows and we knock on every door between there and River of Ponds. I'm a school board trustee. Am I doing anything wrong according to this policy? That was the question that was asked earlier.
No.
How is that any different?
The intent of the policy, as it's stated there, is if you're going to run for nomination or a candidacy, that is the intent of the policy. Is that correct that I'm reading around the table? That's obviously a matter of opinion. Now we need to go to a vote on the motion if there's no further discussion. Hearing any further discussion?
I don't understand. I'm just
hearing none. All in favor of the motion? Can I raise hands? We need hands raised. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those against the motion? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Therefore, motion fails. Does not pass. Okay, thank you. Next order of business. We haven't finished the... No, keep going.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed some discussion about the last motion that was lost, but we have to move on. We do not have a policy as of now.
No.
The other item, of course, is to entertain questions on the other parts of the minutes. I draw your attention particularly to the second page and invite any questions that may arise from the motion that we made or from anything else.
Okay, any further questions?
You may want to go to Winson.
Any further wins? Oh, okay. We're not enclosed.
I'm drawing people's attention to the motion that we made, and you were involved in it. I'd simply invite you to speak if you wish, or you want to wait till the close, that's fine.
Thank you, Chair. With reference, I guess, to the second part of our executive meeting on the 5th of April, I distributed a letter to the executive that I had received from the executive director of the NLTA. On March the 22nd, I received a call from the president of the NLTA, Dean Ingram, and that's not uncommon that I would, in that in many cases before, several, Mr. Ingram would call me and say, this is the situation, and I'm calling you now because you once sat in this chair as a former president of the NLTA. So when I received this call on the 22nd, I was certainly not surprised that that would be the case. What I was surprised in was the fact that, based on a decision that I had made as a trustee, that I was being told that there was a move afoot to uninvite me to the President's Banquet at their BGM in Easter week, and also that I would not be welcome or recognized during any part of the session held during the weekend. At that point, I had said to the President, you do what you got to do. It's really out of my hands right now. So that was basically what we said. So on March the 28th then, I received this letter from Steve Brooks, the Executive Director, indicating to me that what the President had indicated to me was indeed true. And it was outlined in the letter that I had forwarded to staff to distribute it to the Executive. And at that time, then, it was discussed at our Executive meeting.
Okay, and the result of that discussion at the executive meeting, and there was two components that came out of that letter, and the letter has been shared. One of the components was obviously a relationship that Trustee Carter has with the NLTA. That's sort of outside our purvey. It's a relationship he has with them. And then there's another piece about the intent of the letter. And the intent of the letter, from our point of view, was clearly, as we read into it, was clearly trying to influence a trustee over and above with external forces to try and get an individual to make a decision in a certain direction outside of what they're currently doing. We did write, and the letter was included in the packages, back to the NLTA just on that point, that we didn't appreciate the fact that, and it doesn't do anything to the professional relationship that we had, and we did fire that back. So that was what the executive decision was at that point of time, was to write that letter on behalf of one of our trustees to the NLTA, which we have done, and you've seen the letter. And over the next day or two, you'll see another response that's came back on Friday, and I think it's been uploaded. Is there any questions associated with this?
Yeah, thank you. This, again, is an example, obviously, of the executive acting on behalf of the board and coming back to the board to seek input on the decision. The thinking, and I think I speak for most of the executive, not, they'll certainly tell me the difference. We regard this as very serious. This is not, as you might imagine from the surface, just a little slur or something. This is someone who has been an educator all his life, like I have been, and went into the classroom at 5 years old and is still involved in education. This is a very hurtful thing to do. Being elected president of the NLTA now is a singular honor. There are only a couple of dozen people who've ever done it. And once you're elected president, you're accorded a certain respect in your declining years. When you go to the meeting, you're recognized. People make something of you, as they should. To take this away is a very serious matter. It's not just calling people names or something like that. And to Winston's credit, he didn't have to invoke this. He could have not shown up for the meeting. We don't question where people are. He could have voted no, he could have abstained, but no, he stepped up and did the right thing, knowing that the wrath of the NLTA would descend on him. The important thing for us is that this is a punitive action, what we used to call negative reinforcement. This is not designed to change an action that has already occurred. You can't change that. This is designed to influence behavior going forward. And let's not confuse this with the NLTA's position on this case or any other. They're perfectly welcome to make whatever case they want about what we do and what we say. But to single out a trustee, a volunteer, and try to punish him or her for making a decision that he made based on facts as he thought was right is wrong. And in point of fact, it sends a wrong signal to all of us. Do our other professional associations get involved now because of what we are, who we are, what we do? So we did send a letter, yes, and it's now on your behalf as well. So I think it's important to note that we, as a group, cannot tolerate and should not accept this kind of punitive action that is obviously designed to influence votes going forward. I welcome any other response.
Mr. Chair and Trustee Lee, I can tell you that you don't speak for me, if you were wondering. I don't think this belongs on our agenda. I think this is a personal issue, and I expressed that in the executive committee meeting, and I'd be a hypocrite to not express it today. In my mind, there must have been something that provoked it. We haven't discussed that, but and I don't know if we will or if we won't. But Wayne's reference to singling out a single trustee and trying to impose some punitive action or whatever is not unprecedented in our time as a board. And we certainly didn't run as trustees to the defense of someone who was torn apart by the minister. And I kind of take exception to that comment. If we're going to do it for one, we do it for everybody.
To begin with, I feel that, first of all, I'd like to thank the executive for the endorsement and the letters that were sent. I think it was the right thing to do. In fact, at the executive meeting, I very strongly said that if our school board would not be defending one of its trustees, then we're no better than the NLTA that sent the letter in the first place. You know, if we're going to be working on behalf of the students of this province, then I think we should have each other's back at least. Now, I'm not going to be there at the BGM. I've been uninvited. That's fine. But they still can't take away my 35 years of dedication to the service of the students in this province. They cannot take away my accomplishments when I was president. And they're not just uninviting a former NLTA president. They're also uninviting a CTF president. And there's only been 4 in this province that ever made it to that level. You know, and they say that good people sometimes make bad decisions. And this is certainly one of them. There's no doubt about that. You know, they say a drowning man will grab at a straw. And you know what? I'm the straw. Because they're sinking. They're sinking to that level. It was bullying. It was unprofessional tactics that they used. I was not elected to serve as a trustee by the NLTA. I was elected to serve by the people in my region. And you know what? I'm doing a darn good job of doing that. You know, and for someone to say that this is a personal thing for me and it should not belong to this table, I reject that comment. I reject that comment wholeheartedly. You know, and I dearly respect the NLTA and all they stand for. You know, I've got no problems with that. And I wish them all the best and all the delegates the very best at their BGM this year.
Thank you, Mr. We got new discussion on, Trustee Burden.
There's something that's missing. Nobody's articulated what gave rise to this initial letter. Are we not going to talk about that?
Hang on a second. Okay. There are certain things that we have to be careful about because we discuss human resource issues in closed session. And this, rightly or wrongly, was precipitated from a closed session. And we're going to discuss it again in closed session, like we should do, because you have to protect the rights of individuals outside of this space because we're in public session. So is there any new discussion? We're going to go there. We're going to go to Trustee Bennett afterwards. Trustee Aspel.
I understand it seems like a very emotional issue for you to be personally attacked and to be accused of providing false information, and I share your sentiment. And when you said, I am here to represent students in my zone as opposed to the LTA, I share that too. I support the letter on your behalf. I wish the one on my behalf had been as swift and as serious as yours was. So going forward as a board, I think we need to be conscious of the fact that we work as one board and we represent our colleagues around this table in the same fashion. And if we're calling to action for one, which I support, we call to action for all.
Trustee Bennett.
Yes, just one quick comment. I was going to say I beg to differ with Mr. Burden. We did back up one of our colleagues before and demanded a letter of, well, not reconciliation, but that, you know, she'd be.
Okay, any further discussion on the piece? Hearing none, you're going to propose it.
Mr. Chairman, if there are no other, If there are no other questions, I would entertain a motion that the minutes, or I would move that the minutes be adopted, begging a seconder.
Seconded by John. All in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes our report.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the Finance and Operations Report. And we're going to look to Peter.
I thought we were going to clue up. Thank you very much, Chair. The Finance and Operations Committee report consists of 3 motions today. The first one is a request from Burnt Islands, the Burnt Island Fire Department. The school district received a request from the town of Burnt Island's Fire Department for a parcel of land on which they plan to place a railway car for training purposes. The town has been funded to purchase a fire training smokehouse as per Fire Chief Corin Throne. The Fire Department has requested that NLSD allow them to place the smokehouse on a piece of property owned by us. The building would be used to help the fire department's training procedures, which is part of the province's fire emergency services program. The facility will help in basic training and enable firefighters to become certified under fire emergency services. The 40 by 30 building will be secure when not in use and will be left mobile should the district decide we need to use the land. Facilities managers confirm that the school principal that the space requested is not used by the school. It's a former softball field that is not being used and is now grown over. It's located some distance from the school. Entrance to the field is approximately 73 meters from the school, and the smokehouse is approximately 112 meters from the school. Mr. Chair, I'd like to move a motion that the board approve the recommendation of the Finance and Operations Committee to grant the request from the town of Burnt Island's Fire Department with the stipulation that the town must commit to removing the structure if requested by the district within 60 days and provide with certificate of insurance indemnifying the district against liability claims.
A little bit. Deja vu. I have a seconder for the motion. It is Trustee Bennett. And without further discussion, as I've already gone through, we're going to call the vote. All in favor of the motion? Okay. Those against? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The second issue is a photocopier purchase lease. Request for the board to approve up to $750,000 for the purchase of 110 photocopiers. These are multi-function devices for various schools throughout the district. All copiers being replaced have been in the schools for over 5 years and need to be replaced. I think everybody has a copy of that list and what schools are impacted. It was forwarded in your kits. Xerox has been awarded the government's print services contract for all Newfoundland government entities, and a list of schools and expiry dates is attached. Financing is to be arranged through the Royal Bank. So I'd like to move the following motion, that the board approve the recommendation of the Finance and Operations Committee to approve the purchase up to $750,000, inclusive of net HST, worth of replacement copy print duplication technology from Xerox under the provincial RFP, and arrange the necessary lease financing with a 5-year amortization term, and such lease financing subject to ministerial approval.
Do I hear a seconder of the motion? Moved by Trustee Smith, seconded by Trustee Smith. Any further discussion? Trustee Simmons.
Just a question, Peter. I know from my time in administration, and I apologize if you've already copied it. Or covered it. I was out of the room. Is there a cost per copy still associated with these machines, or is this an outright buy?
I'm not quite sure if it's an outright buy, but I think that Terry can probably address this better than I can in terms of individual copies.
There is still a small cost per copy on these machines, and they're still serviced by Xerox, so it is still there, and that's why at the end of these leases they get returned and we can get new ones after they reach their number of copies.
Any further questions or discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion? Those against? Motion carries.
Your Chair, I just seek your direction on the next one. It's an update on our quarterly budget status update. Should I just move to the motion, or would you like me to speak to it?
All the trustees have had the opportunity prior to the meeting to get the document is still there, and as it's tabled at the table, it is a public document. So therefore, I would just encourage you to move to the motion, and if there are any questions, it will come up in discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In that case, then I'd like to move the motion that the board approve the recommendations of the Finance and Operations Committee to approve the revised quarterly budget update for the period ending December 31st, 2018.
Do I hear a seconder of the motion? Seconded by Trustee Gill. Any questions or discussion associated with the quarterly update? Hearing none, I move to all in favor of the motion. Those against? Motion carries.
And just from an information point of view, for those people who are watching us at home, if you go to our website, information on our individual expenses are on the website if you're curious about that. And as well, as per the bylaws, the expenses of the chair of the board were reviewed by our committee, and in keeping with this, everything is fine. We just, it's something the bylaws call for. And with that, I'll sum up my report. Thank you very much for your patience.
Can you move a motion to accept, to have the report accepted as presented? So moved? Oh, hang on a second. We're not there yet. Trustee Smith was...
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I just noticed in the new business, under trustee expenses, my name's not there.
Just because you spent less money than me.
I guess that's a good thing.
I guess we assume that's an omission rather than an error, right? Okay, so pending that, the goose egg that John Smith had, we will suggest that he had zero expenses as per our finance officer, but we'll make that correction in the final piece. Do we have a seconder for the motion? Seconded by Trustee Carter. All in favor? Those against? Motion carries. Thank you. Now we're moving on to the Programs Committee report. Trustee Ryan.
Mr. Chair, as there are no motions from the first report, I'll put both reports together in the effort of time. On February 21st, our committee met, and it's intriguing that we took the presentation from Indigenous Education from Ms. Tina White and reviewed it, looking forward to the board meeting on June 8th and 9th in Goose Bay, and we were looking at having the opportunity to review how the Indigenous partners and ourselves do things in Labrador. We moved on to the chronic absenteeism issue, when children disappear, the CYA report. It was an information piece for us. And again, it's interesting that our commentary at this meeting is very reflective of the commentary that was held this morning with Mr. Gardner. The recommendations in that CYA report were that the Department of Education and Early Child Development, in conjunction with the school districts, the Department of Children, Seniors and Social Development, and the Department of Health and Community Services, and the regional health authorities do the following things. They develop an action plan to address chronic absenteeism. They implement policy, particularly identifying how staff will assess and respond to these chronic absenteeism. They will collaboratively develop and implement policies and protocols, particularly define the point at which chronic absenteeism situations require referral. And they will define how all these partners will collectively, collectively contribute to addressing chronic absenteeism. And that appears to be the way that we've been thinking. There was much discussion on that report, after which our committee requested Mr. Walsh to look into the development of a media campaign on the importance of attendance and any impact that it has with the communications division of our district. We also had a discussion with regard to the organizations that come into our schools. Again, we could come to no consensus, simply to say that Mr. Walsh is going to come back to us with further information. And we were given information on the redundancy and reassignment process that's going to take place as it does every other year. We move now to the February 21st report of our committee. The first item on our agenda that night was the CDLI content development in grade 9. And that's something we've been, as a committee, working on for a couple of years. We had hoped this had happened last year. We were very fortunate to have with us online Mr. Tim Goodyear and in person the SEO for that particular piece, Ms. Georgina Lake. The idea is to offer grade 9 mathematics right now to students who ordinarily would not have a qualified math teacher in small rural schools across the island, particularly in multi-grade situations. I won't go on about that. I could, but I won't. We moved on then to a policy, and this is the first of the motions that we'll be dealing with. This is the whistleblower policy, or the employee disclosure of wrongdoing. Our board is committed to upholding the public trust and to ensuring the highest standard of behaviour. We expect all employees and all others performing work on behalf of the board to behave in an ethical and honest manner at all times. Furthermore, the board believes that the vast majority of its employees are committed to acting professionally, with integrity, and in the best interest of students and the public. This policy would apply to all NLESD employees, unionised, non-unionised, management, full-time, part-time, casual, substitute, permanent, temporary, apprentice, work term, you name it. Bargaining unit employees would obviously consult their respective collective agreements. This is in addition to, and it's in your package, this is in addition to and not a replacement for the Whistleblower Protection Act of the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador. The policy supports addressing a finding of the Auditor General's report, where it says there was no internal reporting mechanism by which employees could report suspected unethical behaviour. This policy puts that in place. Therefore, I move that the board approve the employee disclosure of wrongdoing policy as recommended by the PH&R committee.
Okay, do I have a seconder for the motion? We have a seconder in Trustee Smith. We have a seconder for the motion in the name of Trustee Smith. Any further discussion or questions about the policy around the table, understanding that we've had this circulated prior? Hearing none, Do I get a motion? All in favor of the motion? Those against? Motion carries. Thank you, Kevin.
The second motion we're bringing forward is about a policy called Criminal Record Screening and Vulnerable Sector Check. This board requires that all new employees, post-secondary students, and owners and employees of private contractors who may be alone with students provide satisfactory criminal record screening certificates, including a vulnerable sector check from the RNC or the RCMP, prior to the commencement of any duties. This policy applies to all successful candidates recommended for employment with the district and all existing employees. It also applies to owners and employees of private contractors who are successful bidders for district services and whose employees may be in the position to work along with students to fulfill their contractual obligation, or who provide transportation services. All volunteers providing services deemed medium or high risk, as outlined in the district's volunteer policy, all post-secondary students completing work terms, individuals completing government-sponsored employment or training, and any other individual providing service to our students, and that includes photographers. The NLESD has responsibility to provide a safe and secure working and learning environment. All reasonable precautions had to be taken to determine whether individuals pose a threat to students, employees, or district operations, in particular those who have direct and regular contact with students or are in positions deemed safety sensitive. This policy was originally developed and passed by a board in November of 2014. This is the revamped policy, the highlights of which are the elimination of third-party criminal record check providers, the evaluation criteria for positive criminal record checks, and the expectations for contractors doing work in schools. After some discussion, the committee found that this was appropriate to bring to the board, and so I move that the criminal records screening and vulnerable sector check policy be accepted by the board as presented.
Thank you, Trustee Ryan. Can I have a seconder to the seconded by Trustee Burden? Any question, discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
All right.
Those against? Motion carries.
That is the end of my report. I move that the table please adopt this as presented.
So in the motion, we're actually accepting the two sets of minutes in the report for both meetings.
Yep.
Okay. Do I have a seconder to accept? Seconded by Trustee Ayres. Any further discussion question? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Thank you, Trustee Ryan. Okay. The next order of business is the first of our ad hoc committees, which will be governance. And I ask Trustee Aspel to provide the update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Governance Committee met on March 26th. We had a number, our primary focus was to develop an evaluation, to review the evaluation survey. We had an evaluation survey prepared for us by a consultant, and it was distributed to all trustees, so the results were reviewed and discussed by our committee. Any key issues were highlighted as we work towards putting together a priority list of how we could improve our operations as a board. We do have a motion that is coming out of that meeting, is that the Governance Committee recommends that the board directs senior staff to review the board meeting schedule for 2019-2020 with the intent to add 3 additional Skype meetings in order to keep the board informed. I would like, so before that motion goes to the floor for a vote, I would like to amend the motion so that it would read that the Governance Committee recommend that the Board direct senior staff to review our meeting schedule for 2019-2020 with the intent to add 3 additional Skype meetings or working sessions to keep the Board informed.
Do I have a seconder for the motion? Sorry. Do I have a seconder for the motion, seconded by Trustee Beal? Any questions or hearing none? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Those against? Motion carries.
Thank you. There was some discussion about our the strategic communication section of our facilitators report. We had a facilitator meet with us in January to work with us in how the Governance Committee was going to move forward and identify our work plan. And from that, we have prioritized our tasks. So our priorities have been identified as improvements to communications, both internal and external, and finalizing the roles and responsibilities of the board chair and vice chair and the executive. So based on that, we would develop a terms of reference or a roles and responsibilities piece that would come back to the board for review and approval. That meeting ran a little bit long, so we decided to defer it to another meeting. And before I go into that one, we put a motion to accept this report as presented.
Sorry, Jennifer. So moved by Jennifer that the first meeting of the Governance Committee's minutes be accepted. Seconded by Trustee Whittle. Any question, discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Those against? Motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, so our second meeting was on April the 8th. We had encouraged all members of the committee to review the facilitator report online and provide any commentary on specifically the roles and responsibilities of the chair and vice chair. After review, the committee had recommended that there were no changes required. And with regard to the role of the trustee, it was agreed that that would be part of the role of the Bylaw and Constitution Committee to revise the role of the trustee and include it in their work. The role of the Executive Committee was to be discussed at a future meeting. There is a motion that has resulted from this meeting. I will read it first. The Governance Committee recommends that the Board accept and approve the roles and responsibilities of the Chair and Vice Chair as outlined in the Facilitator Report. Following our working session today and our discussion of the information contained in that report, I would like to withdraw that motion and return this work back to committee.
Okay. So the technical way to do this would be to withdraw the motion.
Yeah, there's no motion before the trustees if the motion is not being brought forward.
So we won't be bringing the motion forward, and we're going to return this work back to committee. So I would move that we accept this report as presented.
Thank you, Jennifer. Can I hear a seconder for the motion? Seconded by Trustee Burden. All in favor? Those against? Motion carries. Thank you. Next on our piece would be the wandering man in Portugal, but he's not here, so we did have our CEO provide update, and the updates within our packet.
Correct. There's no motions on the floor.
Okay, thank you. So all the documentation associated with our second ad hoc committee is included in the package and can be seen on the online. So therefore, do we need to take the motion to accept the update, or is that not? Probably we'll wait till. We'll defer the acceptance of that until the chair of the committee is actually here and can speak to it in more detail. Thank you. Next on our business is the new business. You'll see under 7.1 there is no report because from the NLSP because there were no NLSPA because there were no meetings, but we do have an item tomorrow morning. The Educational Foundation report for April 5th, 7.2.
Thank you, Chair. Education Foundation report. We met on April the 5th, 2019, and I'd like to provide an update now to the board from that meeting. 2 motions were approved by the committee. our bylaws, NLEF bylaws. As per request from the Newfoundland Labrador Educational Foundation Committee at the last meeting, the bylaws have been revised based on comments and suggestions received from committee members. These bylaws are ready to be brought forward for approval by the Newfoundland Labrador Education Foundation Committee. It was moved by Hayward Blake and seconded by John Smith that the Newfoundland and Labrador Education Foundation Board approved the March 22nd, 2019 version of the NLEF bylaws as presented, pending the addition of a section to clarify funding criteria. Now, there's no motion to be made here at this table. This motion has already been carried by the Foundation. Scholarships for 2018-2019 school year. There are 27 scholarships annually at a value of $1,000 per scholarship offered to students attending level 3 and continuing on with their education. And those scholarships are distributed around the island. And Thierry, you might want to make a comment on that, how those scholarships are distributed around the island or the province?
Sure. We do a distribution based on the number of students that are in each of our 4 regions to try and give an equal opportunity based on ratio of numbers. So there's, of the 27, 25 are divided between our Labrador region, Western region, Central region, and the Avalon region, or Eastern, and then we do 2 at large out of across the entire province after we do that distribution of the first 25 to give 2 more individuals an opportunity across the island for a scholarship.
Okay, thank you. And it was moved by Kevin Ryan and seconded by Pam Gill that the Newfoundland Labrador Educational Foundation Board approve the scholarships for 2018-2019 as per past practice, and that was carried. Scholarships and grants for 2019-2020 school year. We will continue with scholarships for level 3 students as per past practice. We will provide 9 awards in the amount of $50 each for primary, elementary, and junior high students every 3 months. This would translate into a total of 27 $50 awards being offered each year to students. And we have provided grants for deep learning initiatives as well. And it was noted that schools, the principals, should be given a choice on how to implement the awards, discussion with principals to gain ideas on how to best distribute the money. We'll continue conversations to finalize ideas to be implemented for the 2019-2020 school year. So, Mr. Chair, I move the adoption of my report.
Do I have a seconder? Seconder is Trustee Smith. Any further questions or discussion before going to? Okay, hearing none.
Just briefly, Mr. Chair.
Yep, Trustee Burden.
The Education Foundation is very interesting. It's fascinating. It's something that's really good to be part of. You've got some resources that you can do some good with. And I can't get the image of the snowshoes out of my mind. And, maybe in the future we can look at awarding students who make the best snowshoe or who go to the boat building museum and can shape out a set of timbers the best in the class or whatever. Rather than just straight academics, it might be something. If we get a little bit more creative, it might be interesting.
Thank you.
No, I think that's a great idea, Trustee Burden, and some of the ideas that Trustee Kendall mentioned are just some ideas as to ways to get more of the foundation throughout the year and reward students for achievement. And I think those ideas that you just brought up and putting some more money towards students that are doing those creative things is definitely a good idea, and we welcome those ideas to be able to use the money. That's correct.
Yep. Excellent. We have a motion, an entertained motion on the table. No further discussion or question. Can I have an answer in terms of who's in support of the motion, please? All in favor? Those against? Motion carries. Thank you, Trustee Kendall. The next item, NLISE report, there's no report because of no meeting. School Milk Foundation, there's no report, similar circumstance. So the next item under our new business is the schedule for 2019-2020 board meeting schedule, and that's presented in your package, and there were two options. And I'm going to pass the floor over to our Vice Chair to entertain and present the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the Chair said, there were two options presented. I am moving that the Board approve option number 2. That's one of the 6 meetings for the 2019-20 school year as outlined, with the location of one meeting to be determined. Begging a seconder.
Do I have a second to the motion? Seconded by Trustee Simmons. Any questions or hearing none? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Those against? Motion carries. Thank you. That concludes the new business section. There is as we normally do, there is a whole section on correspondence sent to the district and correspondence sent from the district. Are there any, and these are included in your package, are there any specific questions associated with any of these that trustees may have? I know the packages were out beforehand. I am not hearing any, so in the absence of hearing any, thank you for that. And now this draws our open meeting to an end, and I would like to thank anybody that has taken the opportunity to plug in from across the province. It's a functional meeting that we have to deal with the business of the district on a regular basis, and this is it's a good thing now we're able to expand our horizon and do that. So this comes to the end. So can I get a motion to move to closed? Adjourn to close. Moved by Wayne, seconded by Tom. All in favor? Aye. So we're going to just now that we're moved to close, we're going to take a time out, and we're going to give everyone a chance to shut down all the IT, and then we'll go into closed.